Hello everyone. In this video we're going to be doing a conservation on this magnificent electric motor which was made by the Holtzer-Cabot company. One unique feature of this motor is its incredibly ornate detail. It's without a doubt one of the most beautiful electric motors that was ever manufactured. This motor first appeared in their catalogs around 1895, so it's approaching 130 years old. It was also available as a fan, and in today's market, most people who obtain one of these motors would probably convert it into a fan, but we're going to preserve it and keep it in its original format. This motor is highly sought after by collectors. It's extremely rare, and at the time when these motors were coming out, they were available in a couple different formats. The electrical grids at that time hadn't been standardized yet. So depending on where you lived in the country, you may have had 133 hertz, you may have had 60 hertz, so you could order the fan or the motor to your specifications. This particular motor is a 60 hertz. It's rated to run on 104 volts, which was common at the time. But I did take off that little cover, and I noticed that on the centrifugal switch back there, it's stamped 133 hertz because it was also available in that format. But this one is clearly stamped for 60 on the back cover there, and it appears to be a 6-pole design, 1200 RPMs. If I flip it around here, you can see that the front end bell has a beautiful fleur-de-lis design, and you'll notice that there's just one oiler there. It's a single bearing design with one long bearing instead of two short ones. So we're really going to take our time on this and do a nice conservation on it and preserve it for generations to come. This is the type of motor, quite frankly, that will probably end up in a museum one day. So we want to make sure that we do it right. Anyways, I think you're going to enjoy following along on the conservation of this beautiful piece. Alright, we're going to start taking it apart from the back. I did have this cover off. I just wanted to look at the switch that was back there. That's as far as I took it, though. I haven't done anything else to it. As with any project, I did take some pictures of it so we kind of know where things are. Beautiful, huh? Put that on the side. Now if you look, you could see that centrifugal switch is an unusual design. Behind here you can see there's actually two copper sheets that touch each other. So I'm going to go ahead and get some detailed photos of the switch so that when I put it back together I can look at those for a reference. I'll bring you guys right back. Okay, I did get a couple more detailed photos of this inside area, and I marked this set screw with a black marker there to mark the top of it, and I took some photos showing how many threads were sticking out because I'm going to assume that this is some kind of an adjustment for that switch. So one thing I'm noticing right off the bat is if you look at the terminal on the right, you'll see that it has a flathead screw and a washer securing the mechanism in place. And if you look at the one on the left, you could see that that head and washer are missing, but I can see the indention on that washer. It looks like there should be one there, but the head of the bolt and the washer appear to be missing. When we take this apart, we'll look and see if they're inside the housing, but if they're not in there, we will replace that because yeah, that's missing off of there. So we'll make a note of that and carry on. Alright, this is a small and delicate operation, so if I block the camera, I apologize in advance. The fact that this washer just come right off of there like that lets you know that that is indeed broken. Okay. If you could read that, but right there, it's stamped 104 volts, 133 hertz. Serial number on this one is 767. But as I mentioned before, this one was the 60 hertz model. So now, let me take the pulley off the front, and then we'll start taking these endbells off. Alright, let's try getting this front pulley off. Hopefully this thing just slips on there and we don't have to get our pullers out. That's good. Now there's a spacer here and a couple washers. It's hard to believe, but this motor was actually being utilized on a bench grinder. When I do the before and after pictures at the end of the video, I do have a picture of the bench grinder that this thing was powering. I flashed it on the screen so you could see it. Well, let's see if we can get those off of there. I don't know what those are. I'll be careful. Careful not to break them. One thing that's kind of surprising is the shaft on this motor is in remarkably great condition for the age. Usually on an old motor like this, that thing's going to be all galled up. But that thing is in nice condition. Okay, I'm going to take these front screws off that secure the end bell on. One thing I was noticing is, I mean, there is no play in that bearing. It's remarkable, the condition of this motor given the age on it. So that bearing is definitely in good condition. That makes things a little bit easier for us. One thing I noticed on a couple of these, it looks like at some point this motor was knocked over. Some of these are bent, so there's a threaded rod that runs through there that I'm sure is bent up, so we'll see if we could gently straighten that up when we put it back together. A couple of these are real hard to get off, and you can't put the vice grips on here because you'll damage those threads, so I'm using a piece of brass like a pair of soft jaws. And got that clamped down there. Seems to be working out all right. There's 3 of them that are stuck on there pretty tight. I didn't want to put any heat on it or anything like that, so this approach seems to be working. So let me get the other ones off. Bring you guys right back. Okay, it appears that the front and rear end bell are held captive in this base. So I'm going to take that bolt out of there and remove that first before I try separating these. Once I get that off, I'm going to see about taking off these rear terminals. And then at that point, we should be able to get things separated. Okay, it's kind of hard to see down there, but looking down in that area there with a magnifying glass, I can see what appears to be the head of a brass bolt. So I'm going to make the assumption that the terminals on the end here are just screwed on there. So we're going to try to carefully unscrew them, and hopefully we won't break anything. I sprayed these up with a little penetrating oil and let them sit. Just gave them a couple gentle taps with a nylon hammer, and here we go. Just taking them off with my fingers. And there's a couple more washers right there. We'll take those off. There it is. Whew, that was a delicate operation right there. Here you can see the end bell with that long bearing. Interesting design. You can see right there where a couple of those bolts are bent. I was telling you about that in the beginning, where this thing was dropped or knocked over. Anyways, I can't get that rear end bell off with those bent out of whack like that. So I'm going to use probably a long socket, something to slide over that, or a tube, and see if I could persuade those back very gently, try to straighten them out again, just enough so we can get off the rear end bell. I'll bring you guys back. By straightening out those bolts, I was able to persuade that rear end bell off. And when you look in here, you could see it's extremely delicate. Those start windings are very fine gauge wire. There's some mica insulation in there which breaks apart pretty easily. So when we're cleaning this, we're going to be real careful not to damage anything. Okay, the rotor itself is in the lathe. I'm just giving everything a light cleaning, not trying to make it shiny. Got the rotor nice and cleaned. It's clean but not polished. And if you look at this flyweight here, right, this is what controls the 2 contacts on the centrifugal switch. It's just a simple but durable design. If you look in there, you see a little weight See that weight sitting in there in that opening? All that happens is, as the motor gets up to speed, that weight flies out, and when it flies out, it takes this little rod with it, and that rod is what keeps the tension on those two contacts. So as the motor speeds up, that rod moves backwards. When that happens, the two contacts separate and take the start winding out of the circuit. We're going to proceed with the cleaning of the stator windings, and this is a delicate operation. Some of the start windings, some of the individual strands of wire have separated from the group, and they're a really delicate wire, very fine, and it would be easy to break them. So I have a couple soft brushes here. We're going to take our time on it, and I'm going to try to get the loose dirt removed first. I'll vacuum that up, and then we'll hit it with a little bit of contact cleaner just to freshen them up a little bit. So let's get started on it. Spent quite a bit of time getting those windings nice and clean, and now that they're clean, I got them getting warm and dry. They're wrapped up in this heating pad, which I like to use, and that's covered up by a thick, heavy blanket. There's other ways that you could warm up the windings for the purpose of applying insulating varnish. You could run a voltage through them, but for me, this is a foolproof way to do it. There's no risk of those things getting too hot, nothing like that. So I'm just going to let it sit in here for a while and bake. And when it's nice and toasty, we'll put some insulating varnish on those windings to protect them. We got 3 good coats of insulating varnish applied to both sides of the stator windings, and they look great. Additionally, I secured the areas where there was a couple loose strands of starter windings coming loose. I just used some friction tape for that. Going through some of the hardware on this, if you'll recall, that one bolt was broken off on the terminal, and I did not find the head or the washer inside the motor housing, so that's lost. And we were missing a washer, so this is a number 5 bolt. I have one that's a little long. I'll just cut it down, and I have a similar washer. I'll just weather those a little bit to help them blend in, and we should be good to go. In other videos, you've seen me use this carding wheel before, which I mentioned is a real soft wheel. So the idea is that we're trying to clean but not polish the hardware on this. Okay, we're just cleaning it. You notice it gets a nice light sheen to it, but we're not polishing it. Anyways, it's kind of interesting that we're using an old motor to refurbish another old motor. I'm going to go ahead and clean all this hardware up in the same fashion. I'm over here at the anvil, and I'm trying to peen those nuts that were bent up back into shape. Now, to be honest, if I wanted to cheat, I could walk over to my other Holtzer-Cabot motor, and I could take the nuts off of that one and replace these with those, but I'm not going to do that. I'll just keep this all original, and I'm just going to peen these up the best I can, and we'll put them back on there. Starting to do a little bit of a polish on some of the painted pieces, just using some cleaner wax from Meguiar's. And on this decorative piece here, what I did was I heated it up with the heat gun, and I put a little bit of paste wax on a soft cloth and just hit the raised surfaces of it. And by it being warm, the paste wax just kind of melted right in there. It looks real nice. You know, it has a nice sheen to it, but it's not sprayed or clear coated or anything like that. So this base has given me a little bit of a dilemma, because my goal is to try to keep the motor looking as original as possible. But if you look here, you see how that pitting is real bad in that base right there? And there's no finish left on that at all. And also over here where it was pulled out of the sand mold, you see how you could see where it broke away there? I'd like to smooth that out with the Dremel a little bit. This is finished in Japanning, and it's not painted. If you look right here, you Okay, you can clearly see that. Japanning is a time-consuming finish, and it's a beautiful finish. And that's one reason why when you look at some of these motors that have been restored and the people just put paint on it, it's not the same. Anyways, I've decided to go ahead and do a little bit of repair work on this, just the base of the motor, just to kind of help it blend in with the rest of the motor, because the rest of the motor, you know, yeah, the finish is not perfect on there, but it's definitely salvageable. We'll just put a little polish on that and call it good. But here, okay, there's no bringing that back. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one coat of Japanning on there. And I do have a video on the other Holtzer-Cabot motor that I restored where I explained the process in more depth. Anyways, I'm going to put a coat of Japanning on this. We'll give it a couple bakings, and I'll try to fill in these pits a little bit. And then if I need to, once it comes out of the oven, I could wear that Japanning down a little bit and help it look a little bit more beat up, so to speak. Let me get started on that. Alright, we got our first coat of Japanning on there. We're going to stick this in the oven for a couple hours at 200 degrees and then let it cool down, and then a couple more hours at 385. Alright, we got our front end bell fastened into position and it looks great. Now we're carefully, and I do mean carefully, going to put the rotor in there. Just putting a light coat of oil on the shaft to help it in there. Okay, good. That's spinning nice and freely, no problems. Not binding anywhere. Now we're going to start working on the centrifugal switch, getting that rear end bell back into position. To keep the rotor from moving around while I'm working on it, I temporarily put that collar back on the shaft with that set screw. So now I could lean the motor down on top of the shaft and it won't pop out. We got the rear end bell screwed back on there, and I temporarily put these terminals on there just to keep the connections from pulling back inside the housing. And now I'm going to put together this little centrifugal switch, and at that point we should be ready to give it a little test run. We got our switch back together. I tried recording that, but I'll be honest with you, that took a few four-letter words to get that thing back together. It was a delicate operation. Anyways, it's back together. I don't know if you could make it out in the camera, but there's a little divot right there. And that divot needs to ride right there at that point, because that's the point that retracts when the contacts need to separate. Probably blocking the camera with my hand, but there's not a lot of room in here. If you'll recall, when I was taking this thing apart, I took some photos of that set screw. That set screw is like the backstop for the contact, so that adjusts how far they need to travel before they touch each other. And there was 4 threads exposed when I took this thing apart, so we're going to roll with that. This little arm
Point it to the right. Leave it right about there. If we need to adjust it further, we can. Alright, these terminals I had just put on temporarily to keep the contacts from pulling back inside the housing. Now I'm going to need to put these insulating washers back on here, but in order to do that without losing the little bolt back inside of there, I'm going to have to use this little hook here. Let's try to do this side in the same fashion. Okay, good. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to apply some zoom spout oil to this bearing, and then we'll put the oiler back on. Zoom spout's pretty good oil. Okay, now there's a leather washer in this oiler that, in between the oiler and the housing. I did go ahead and I reconditioned that leather washer with a little bit of neat's foot oil. Just gonna tighten this finger tight. Like that. Get the cap back on there. Okay, now these terminals got a couple screws in them to secure the wires in place. Let's see, where are they at? Here's one right here. Right here. Okay. That should be sufficient to give it a little test and make sure it's going to fire up. Alright, we're going to start this thing up with the variac. I don't have the base on it to stabilize it, so I'm just going to hold it up with my fingers. That will also let me know if I get zapped that I did something wrong. I'm going to turn on our variac, start this thing up. Okay, well I haven't got zapped yet, that's a good sign. I got this running on about 104 volts right there. Take my hand off of it. You can see here we're drawing about 1.42 amps, so very little load on that. Seems to be running great. I got you zoomed in so you can see the centrifugal switch in action. As you can see right there, the blades are closed, and when we start this thing up, you're going to see that that little arm will withdraw into the rotor, and when it does that, those contacts will open, and that disconnects the start winding from the circuit. There we go. Okay, see how that arm moved in? Now you can see those blades are no longer touching each other. And now when we turn it off, the opposite will happen. The weight in the rotor will fall down, the arm will push the two contacts back together, and the start winding will be re-engaged for the next time you go to start the motor. Just like that. Primitive, but it works. This locking collar right here that goes behind the pulley also functions to control the axial play of the rotor. In a single bearing design, if I didn't have that collar on there, there'd be nothing keeping that rotor from bouncing around in there when the motor was running, potentially pushing those two contacts together when they're not supposed to be. By having this locking collar in place, the rotor can't travel backwards. Here's the newly japanned base. I put it on pretty thin so that you could still see some defects through there, which is what we want. We don't want that to look new and the rest of the motor to look old. It's a little bit shinier than the rest of the motor, so I'll dull that down with a little steel wool just to help it blend in a little bit better. But you know, if I wouldn't have told you that we re-japanned that piece, nobody would be the wiser. I'm machining a new insert for the pulley. This insert that was in there is a brass one, and the way that it fits on there, if you look at that, it's got too much play in there, so when you tighten down the set screw, it cocks over to the side and it makes it appear as if the shaft is bent on the motor. But that shaft is perfect. It's just the insert is bad on this. So over here in the lathe, I got a piece of scrap material that I had floating around. I'm just going to machine a new insert, press it in there, and then I'll chuck up the pulley itself, and I'll use the 4-jaw chuck, get that running nice and true, and then we'll bore that out, and that should work out just fine. Alright, we got our new insert press fit into the pulley. It's about a 1/1000 press fit in there. We're going to chuck this up in the 4-jaw, get it running nice and true, and then we'll bore that out. If you watch my videos regularly, you know that I have a pretty good collection of antique cloth-covered wire. This motor is so rare and so beautiful that I really wanted something over the top nice and something that's really close to being historically correct for it. So what I did was I actually had wire handmade for this motor. If you look in that Emerson crate there, I had those spools of wire made by a gentleman named Tony Clayton, and his company is called Old School Wire, and he's used regularly among the gentlemen who restore antique fans if you really need some high quality wire. Anyways, this wire was something that I had envisioned in my mind, and he brought it to life. It's a cotton wrapped wire with a shellac coating on it, and it's a simple and elegant wire. So here I have some 18 gauge, and then I also have a couple spools of 16 gauge. For our use here, we're going to use the braided wire. Anyways, if you ever need some custom made wiring, Tony Clayton is your guy. You could search him up online, and he really does a fantastic job. As a matter of fact, this wire is so high quality, I'm probably going to take my Edison bipolar motor and I'm going to remove the other antique wiring that I have off of it, and I'm going to replace it with this stuff. Anyways, back to this motor. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mount the motor onto this base here. This is an antique piece of cypress wood that was reclaimed from a barn, and I also have a beautiful antique switch and an antique plug. Okay, this switch is slightly newer than the motor, to be honest with you, but it's for our purposes, it'll be okay. This plug here is an antique, and it's made out of a material called gutta percha, which was a common material in use at the time. So we're
we're going to go ahead and start getting things together. What I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to make a couple terminals for the wire, and I was looking through. I have a pretty good collection here of brass rods and tubes and things like that, and I found a couple pieces here that'll work, but I'm going to use this one. And the reason why I'm going to use this one as opposed to this one is this is a piece of heavy wall tubing, so that'll be nice and stout when you tighten up that set screw against it. So we're going to run our wire in here and we'll solder it in place, and that'll act as a terminal to go in there. So I'm going to get started on that right now. Making good progress getting the motor bolted to the base. I have some antique hardware here to mount the motor to the base. As you know, we already have those holes countersunk, but I had to cut these down a little bit. I'm just chasing the threads on these to make sure they're working perfectly, and we'll go ahead and get this bolted down. Alright, let's give it a test run. Boom, just like that. Well, I hope you folks enjoyed following along on the preservation of this beautiful piece. It's a motor that I've wanted for a long time, and I'm thrilled to finally have it. Hopefully you appreciate the choices that I made while I was doing it up. Anyways, you guys take care. Look forward to seeing you the next time. Thank you very much for watching.